What is the most frequently repeated commandment in the Hebrew Bible? Well, before this week, I would say, do not oppress strangers, widows and orphans. The commandment which instructs us to look after those who are vulnerable in our society, to make sure that people who are stronger and have power don't use it against those who are less secure and do not have many resources to protect themselves. Well, this week, I prepared a study session about Rabbi Harold Kushner, a conservative rabbi from the States, and I learned that I was wrong. Do not oppress the stranger is the second common commandment in Tanakh, occurring 36 times throughout the text of Jewish canon. The most common phrase, repeating over 80 times, is don't be afraid. In the Hebrew Bible, we hear repeatedly that we should not be afraid. But what does it mean? One can read it as a theological statement. If you truly believe in God, then you should not be scared, as God will protect you whatever happens to you. However, we know that the world does not work this way. Sometimes people suffer, and bad things happen to pious, religious, and righteous people. Deep belief in God does not protect you from injustice and suffering. What does it mean then, not to be afraid? I think that the recent history of our society can help us to understand it. From 2016, we started to talk about refugee crisis, when over 360,000 refugees crossed the Mediterranean Sea in attempts to reach Europe due to the dangers in their home countries. They were in a vulnerable position and afraid, but they made this journey anyway. In 2017, the Me Too movement became one of the main topics of public conversation, raising awareness and calling for change against sexual abuse and harassment against women. Recently, we heard the Black Lives Matter campaign, calling for the fight against racism and advocating racial justice and equality. In all these cases, people said enough and took an active step to challenge this world. It takes a lot of courage to speak out when it is you who are in the receiving end of oppression. Many of these people were afraid to go public and open their personal stories, but they knew that they are doing the right thing. Very often, when you act based on values and become a change maker, you put yourself at risk. Most people want to keep everything unchanged. Often, when you choose to speak out, you don't have a choice, because you cannot tolerate the world treating you in an unjust way anymore. But it is at this time when you need the support of others the most. These stories are not only about oppressed and vulnerable, it is also about the rest of the world. It is about the rest of people to listen and support. I think that the LJS community in all these previous cases, last cases, tried to listen and support. We created a refugee drop-in center and have been supporting hundreds of refugees and asylum seekers. We created a listening campaign and promoted support organizations for women at the time of Me Too. The synagogue's team and volunteers have done an unconscious bias training and have been thinking of how can we make the community a welcoming space for all people, regardless of their ethnicity, origin, gender. We were not afraid to say that maybe we are contributing to the issue, we thought of the way how to make a small change, the change which we can make for ourselves and people around us, and become supportive allies to those who suffer injustice. The work is very far from being complete with all those issues, but I am proud of being a part of the community that is not afraid to act based on our values. This week, following the disappearance of a 33-year-old Sarah Everard in South London, women have been sharing their thoughts, stories, and experiences about what it's like to constantly feel unsafe, being followed, inappropriately touched, and harassed by men. When I read some of the stories, I thought of my role in it. Am I a part of the problem? Am I silent when I need to intervene? As a man, I feel uncomfortable to speak out about it, because I can say something ignorant which will hurt others and I will regret it. As a man, I feel uncomfortable to get involved in emotionally charged and heated conversations when I understand that I represent the oppressor. As a man, I feel uncomfortable to admit that there were many instances in my life when I did nothing, when I saw inappropriate behavior or comment towards women from other men, sometimes my friends. As a man, I feel uncomfortable to say that I should have stopped it and said something. But as a human being, I cannot be silent. As a person, I feel responsibility to call for a change. As a rabbi, I know that Judaism cannot stand idly when other people suffer and feel afraid. Do not be afraid is not only a call to the individual, but the call to the society. We should not be afraid of getting involved, speaking out when things are wrong and unjust. And we should not be afraid of change and taking responsibility for our mistakes. In the last week's parasha, we learned how Israelites offered their gold jewelry to make the golden calf and the consequences of that episode. This week's Torah portion tells us of people's voluntary donations in connections with the building of the tabernacle and its vessels. It is written that men and women, all whose hearts moved them, came bringing brooches, earrings, rings, and pendants. Everyone who would make gifts of silver or copper brought them. Throughout the detailed accounting of the materials donated to construction of the tabernacle and the use made of them, there is only one instance when a particular group of people who donated the materials was specified. The Torah text, Exodus chapter 38, verse 8, says that the basin of bronze and its stand was made from the mirrors of the women. That basin was used for washing priests' hands before they begin any religious ceremony in the Mishkan, the tabernacle. According to the Midrash Tanhuma on this verse, it's a collection of interpretations, legends, and commentaries on the Torah. Moses was furious and didn't want to accept this donation. Mirrors in his eyes represented something bad, immodest, and vain, and could not be used as a material for a holy object. In the Midrash, Moses argued that women used mirrors to make themselves beautiful and therefore tempted man and their evil inclination. Therefore, Moses saw these mirrors as a tool for inappropriate and vain behavior, which women forced on man. However, God had stopped Moses from banning mirrors and said that this was the most precious donation of all, not the expensive stones or pure gold that formed the other vessels, or even the half shekel with its message of equality before God, but mirrors of women were the most precious donation in God's eyes. In the time when Moses tried to use women's appearance as a tool against them, God intervened and stopped it. At the moment when Moses tried to accuse women of tempting man to use their evil inclination, God intervened and stopped it. The two most frequently used commandments in Tanakh came together this week. Do not oppress those who are in a vulnerable position, and do not be afraid to speak out against it. As we read the Torah story about building the sanctuary, we can think about building safe spaces in our society. As we read about voluntary contributions of each Israelite to build the beautiful tabernacle, we can think about how can our contributions, what can we contribute to help building a safe space in our homes, our communities, our streets, our cities, and our countries. Normally, Shabbat is the time when we put our issues and problems on pause and enjoy the well-deserved break from the everyday busy routine. Normally, Shabbat is the time when we experience a little fraction of Olam Haba, the future ideal world where harmony prevails and everyone feels safe. I hope that this Shabbat will be such time for us, but also I hope that this week's Shabbat be an inspiration to make other days like it, where harmony prevails and everyone feels safe. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will.